Have you ever tried to conquer an entire nation with nothing but a snap of your fingers? On a perfectly white table, there is nothing but silence. No flags, no generals, no armies, just emptiness. And history itself, waiting to be laid out like a board game. Welcome to Gaul, in the year 52 BC, where a Roman general named Julius Caesar is about to turn an entire continent into a stepping stone for his ambition. Take a look. With nothing more than a hand placed on the table, tiny armies spring to life. Red cloaks, polished shields, perfect formations. These are Caesar's Roman legions. Across from them, buried in the forests and hills of Gaul, stand long-haired, bearded warriors with round green shields. The Gauls, men who refuse to kneel before Rome. Their leader, Vercingetorix, knows one thing for certain. If he faces Rome's legions on open ground, he'll be crushed under their sandals. So he withdraws 80,000 men to Alesia, a natural fortress on a high hill, shielded by forests and steep, rocky slopes. From the foot of that hill, Caesar looks up, a brutal stronghold. Tens of thousands of spears and arrows already waiting on the walls. A frontal assault? Suicide. Caesar needs a different plan. A plan so crazy, it just might work. And then, he finds it. If he can't fight his way up, he'll make sure they can never come down. Caesar decides to besiege the entire mountain. He doesn't just surround the fortress of Alesia, he surrounds the last hope of the Gauls. Imagine this. Instead of smashing himself against the walls, he turns the whole hill into a giant iron cage. From that moment on, the hand of a tactical genius starts rewriting history. A colossal ring of fortifications begins to form around Alesia. On the white tabletop, small wooden blocks are placed one by one, but for the tiny soldiers standing beneath them, these aren't just pieces of wood, they're walls. They're the difference between life and death. In less than 3 weeks, the Romans build nearly 18 kilometers of fortifications, wrapping the entire hill of Alesia in a wooden noose. The wall stands 4 meters high, with ditches, obstacles, and watchtowers spaced at intervals. Each tower is a set of eyes, watching every movement inside the fortress. But that still isn't enough. In front of the wall, Caesar orders deep trenches. In front of the trenches, he has pits filled with sharpened stakes. In front of those, he lays lilies, deep holes with deadly spikes at the bottom. Layer upon layer, a ring of death. Water-filled ditches, stake pits, killing grounds, a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. Inside Alesia, the Gauls look down and sneer. Keep building. We'll see who runs out of food first. They believe that as long as they hold out, a relief army will come, and Alesia will become Caesar's grave. But war doesn't always follow the rules in the manuals. While the ring of fortifications is still incomplete, while the traps and pits are not yet fully finished, a unit of Gallic cavalry slips out through a narrow gap. They spur their horses, burst through Roman lines, and disappear beyond reach, like a drop of water sliding over the rim of a cup. One tiny mistake, Caesar lets them escape. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the balance of an entire war. Not long after, bad news hits. On the horizon, dust clouds rise. War drums roll like thunder. 250,000 Gallic reinforcements, a grand coalition of tribes, are marching toward Caesar's rear. On the hill, 80,000 Gauls are trapped inside Alesia. Outside, 250,000 more are coming to break the siege. In between, only about 50 to 60,000 Romans. In a single, terrifying moment, the roles reverse. The hunter has become the prey. So what does Caesar do? Run? Abandon the siege? March safely back to Rome and blame the weather, bad luck, or traitors? No, he gives a different order. Build another wall. If there is an enemy in front and another behind, then we will raise walls to hold back both. Outside the first wall around Alesia, Caesar orders a second wall to be built, this time facing outward toward the relief army. Another ring, even larger, stretching up to 21 kilometers. Between those two walls stand the Roman legions, not prisoners, but blades wedged between two slabs of meat. The Romans now live inside a deadly donut. At the center of the donut, on the hill of Alesia, 80,000 desperate Gauls. On the outside, 250,000 more, screaming for blood. And caught between those two extremes is Caesar. Night falls. The white light of day fades into cold shades of blue and purple. The shadows of the fortifications stretch long over the ground. Campfires flicker in the dark. From inside Alesia, Gauls pour down the slopes, smashing into the inner Roman wall. Outside, 250,000 reinforcements crash into the outer defenses. War horns scream from both sides, their echoes colliding in the space between, like two waves trying to crush everything in the middle. Rome is under attack from both fronts. On the ramparts, Roman soldiers grit their teeth as they push enemy ladders back down. At the base of the walls, Gauls slip into ditches, fall into stake pits, and are ripped apart by the lilies. And in the middle of all that chaos, another power intervenes. An invisible hand, Your hand blocks ladders just as they reach the top, flicks away clusters of enemies trying to climb, and clears paths so the Romans can reform their lines. The night at Alesia is long and drenched in sweat, but when the last moonlight fades into dawn, one truth remains: Caesar still hasn't fallen. Dawn at Alesia is anything but comforting. The sun rises, but its light feels like a golden blade, cutting along every crack in the Roman defenses. There is one place Caesar's walls cannot fully reach, where the cliffs of Mount Rhea are too steep and jagged to build reliable fortifications. That is the weak point, the one the Gauls have been waiting for. On the decisive day, they throw 60,000 of their best warriors straight at that spot. The Roman shield line at the foot of Rhea shakes under the impact. Spears, axes, and swords pour down like a storm. At the most dangerous point on the entire ring, Roman numbers are at their lowest. Every meter of ground is pushed back. Every soldier is forced one step more toward disaster. One more step and the entire line will break. At that exact moment, Caesar does something very few commanders of his time would dare. He goes to the front himself. He doesn't hide behind the command tent. He doesn't stay safe behind letters sent back to Rome. He runs along the walls, from one threatened sector to another, calling out the names of his centurions, steadying his men, pointing out into the battlefield, and giving them a reason to hold for just one more heartbeat. Then, at the foot of Mount Rhea, in front of soldiers on the verge of breaking, he does something simple but unforgettable. He tears off his red cloak. The bright crimson fabric whips in the wind atop the ramparts, burning under the harsh sun like a living flame. Caesar knows that if his men can see him in the middle of that chaotic storm, they will fight not just for pay, not just for discipline, but for the man standing there on the line with them. There, that's Caesar. The shout rises from the Roman ranks, from one group to another, until it runs along the whole line. And sometimes, that alone is enough to pull an army back from the brink of total collapse. But even with Caesar himself on the wall, even with trenches, walls, and traps, when the difference in numbers is this huge, courage still needs one last ingredient: a final move. From behind the lines, Caesar unleashes his trump card: the German cavalry, mercenary horsemen, masters of shattering enemy formations with sudden strikes from the rear. They quietly ride around, disappearing from sight of the Gauls who are too busy hammering the Roman line at Rhea. And then, like thunder exploding behind them, they strike. The Gauls, who moments before believed they just needed to crush a thin strip of wall, suddenly realize behind them is the iron of Roman hooves. Crushed between two jaws, the wall in front, the cavalry behind, the elite Gaulish force begins to crack. One man turns and runs, then two, then 10, then entire ranks. In war, the moment morale breaks can be faster than a single breath. And at Alesia, the spirit of the Gauls finally shatters. Once the elite core is broken, the great Gallic relief army begins to fall apart like a receding tide. On our white tabletop, tiny green miniatures tumble off the edge, rolling out of frame. In real life, they are tens of thousands of warriors watching their last hope vanish. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watches from the walls. He knows it's over. The great rescue force, the last chance to break the siege, has dissolved like soap bubbles under Caesar's hand. Alesia is no longer a fortress waiting to be relieved. It has become a perfect mousetrap. Silence slowly settles over the battlefield. The shouting fades. The clash of steel grows rare. All that remains is the sound of wind whistling through shields stuck in the ground, and heavy footsteps echoing along the ramparts. The gates of Alesia slowly open, not for the Gauls to break out, but for a single man to walk out: Vercingetorix. He wears his armor, rides his horse, and descends the slope toward the Roman camp. Every hoofbeat lands like a weight on the pride of his people. In front of Caesar, Vercingetorix dismounts. Many later tales say he took off his armor, laid down his weapons, and placed them at Caesar's feet in a ritual of surrender. Whether every detail is accurate or not, the conclusion is the same: Vercingetorix surrenders. One of the greatest sieges in military history comes to an end. Caesar has completely conquered Gaul, and from that foundation, he will march closer and closer to absolute power, and to the knives waiting for him on the steps of the Senate. If we look at Alesia like a strategy puzzle built out of Lego on a table, I think there are three big lessons. First, turn your weakness into a trap. Caesar is deep in enemy territory, far from home, short on supplies. It's a terrible position. But by fixing the battlefield at Alesia and building 2 rings of fortifications, he turns the "we are surrounded" situation into a pressure cooker that traps the enemy inside with him. Second, controlling space matters more than having numbers. The Gauls have more men, but they don't get to choose where and how the fight happens. The Roman fortifications force them to attack through narrow channels, into ditches, traps, and walls. Places where their numerical advantage gets scraped away bit by bit. Third, always prepare for the worst case scenario. Caesar builds that outer wall before he even sees a single relief soldier. He doesn't wait for the problem to appear and then react. He designs the battlefield in advance, so when the worst happens, his troops are already in the right place. That way of thinking is something you can use not just in war, but in business, investing, and even in how you manage your own time. That's how Julius Caesar used stone, wood, and earth to crush a coalition of warriors far more numerous than his own. If you want me to break down more battles in LEGO style, like Cannae, Thermopylae, or Normandy, drop a comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next strategic dissection in LEGO form right here at Apex War Lab.